What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Gladiator II, which is definitely the best movie that I've ever seen by a director who's about to be 87 years old. Ridley Scott will be 87 in a matter of days, but sadly it's not as good as Gladiator from 2000. But I knew that going into it, as did everybody else who's already seen it so far. And I went into this movie basically with rock bottom expectations, because as much as I love Ridley Scott's filmography, I'm the first to acknowledge he's made a few stinkers over the years. I made a video last year where I ranked every single movie in his filmography, and since I posted that video, he's made two giant feature films. He made Napoleon and Gladiator II, and I think Gladiator II is vastly superior to Napoleon. But it blows my mind that a director who's knocking at the door of 90 years old is still working at this scale, at this level of the game. Like, there are other directors like Clint Eastwood, who's 94, who's still active. But his latest movie, Juror Number 2, was made for like $30 or $35 million. I've heard some obscene numbers when it comes to Gladiator 2 because they had to shut down due to last year's strikes and then resume, which always raises your costs. But of all the directors alive today, of any age, can you name a director who's given us more great historical epics? Also, can you name a director who's given us more bad historical epics? And I'm going to rank all of his historical epics at the end of this video. But right now, let's just focus on Gladiator itself, or Gladiator 2 itself. And I think if you were to compare the leads, Russell Crowe in the first versus Paul Mescal in this one, Russell Crowe's stronger. I mean, that first movie turned Russell Crowe into a massive superstar, and that lasted for a very long time. And if you compare the two scores, the first score is much better. The structure and the overall story that's being told, this new one hits a lot of familiar beats. I mean, if you were just to look at it from like a bird's eye view, you'd be like, oh, you open with a huge battle, you have this leader being enslaved, this time a leader from the other side as opposed to on the Roman side, and then you have them rising to power and then ultimately getting revenge. Like, it basically has like more or less the exact same structure, just with a few different kind of bobs and weaves throughout. So if you're going to docket points for being all too familiar, I think that David Scarpa is a very solid screenwriter, and he's been working with Ridley now for a couple of movies. But people aren't going to be quoting this new movie the way they do the original one. Like, my father, every time I see him, he's like, at my signal, unleash hell. Like, it doesn't matter what circumstances there are. He just likes quoting Gladiator. And every time I call home, he's like, oh, I'm just watching Gladiator again. And he will watch any Gladiator movie, but he really likes Gladiator. Or lines like, what we do in life echoes in eternity. They use that line repeatedly throughout this movie, but that comes from the first. Or strength and honor. It's a very simple phrase, but once again, comes from the first, reused in the second. So in terms of originality, the first one definitely gets a much higher score. And as far as crazy inbred Roman emperors are concerned, I think Joseph Quinn and Fred Hetchinger, if I'm saying their names correctly, as the twin emperors Geta and Caracalla, once again, I hope I'm getting those names correct, they definitely brought the crazy. They were shrill, they were corrupt, they're completely, totally riddled with flaws and disease and all sorts of horrible impulses. So they definitely bring the same level of craziness that Joaquin Phoenix did in the first one. But I think Joaquin Phoenix just was playing a more interesting, fleshed out character. Luckily, we have the great Denzel Washington helping to kind of round out the ranks of characters who you might look at him as a villain, you might look at him as an anti-hero, you might just look at him as somebody with like enlightened self-interest pursuing his own agenda. It's hard to know how to categorize his character, whether he's hero or villain, but he's definitely a very dynamic, larger-than-life character. And I'd heard in advance that Denzel kind of cranked things up a bit and delivered a slightly over-the-top performance. I do not agree. I really like Denzel Washington's performance. If anything, I think he's got the most interesting performance of any actor in the entire movie. And Denzel, he goes way back with the Scott family. He used to work with Ridley's brother Tony over and over and over again. And you could make a case that Denzel Washington's most interesting movies were made with Tony Scott. I mean, watch Crimson Tide, watch Man on Fire. Like, god damn, like Denzel's really fucking good in those. And I think people in the modern age forget just how big movie stars were back in the 1990s. Like, before the internet and social media really took over, stars were very mysterious and iconic and larger than life. And in the 1990s, Denzel was a fucking superstar. And that's in part due to all the amazing movies that he made with Tony Scott, who sadly is no longer with us. But I love seeing Denzel and Ridley carrying on the tradition of Denzel working with the Scott family. But the last unfavorable comparison I'll make between this new movie and the first one is too many digital effects. There's one battle which everybody saw in the trailer where a lot of gladiators have to fight some rampaging monkeys or chimpanzees or baboons. I'm not quite sure what their breed was. They look horrible. Like, they look so digital and they look so kind of shiny and rubbery. They look more like Gollum in the Two Towers than they do like animals. The tigers in the first Gladiator movie were very convincing. I don't know to what degree there was any sort of digital enhancement or assistance on that front, but the tigers in the first movie, like, god damn, that was like my favorite scene in the movie. Like, they were so fucking cool. I think this movie used digital effects as a crutch. It's a tad too much. Like at the beginning of the movie, there's this incredible battle scene, or very strong battle scene, at the country of Numidia. And as all these ships are coming in, it's great siege warfare, and you've got arrows and catapults and everything, and siege towers and all that stuff. But even the ocean, I felt like I was playing an incredible role-playing game as opposed to getting immersed in a great historical epic. And obviously, it's much easier to get on a computer screen 100 ships attacking a city as opposed to going out in the ocean and trying to get all those ships to sail in unison. I get it. It looked a little bit too clean, a little too digital. So I much prefer Ridley when he goes to the practical side, because I'll take a really simple but effective practical effect over a really grand digital effect any day of the week. But apart from some of those flaws that I just mentioned, I think this movie is a very worthy sequel to the original Gladiator. And you've got some familiar faces. You've got Connie Nielsen back, and she's fantastic, still game. You've got Derek Jacobi back. I mean, I love Derek Jacobi. When I first started watching, like British dramas in the late 80s and early 90s, Derek Jacobi was in all of them. And I remember seeing him the first time he made a big impression on me was when Kenneth Branagh made Henry V, and Derek Jacobi's playing the role of like the chorus, kind of like bridging the scenes together, and he was really, really good there. But I also had a book on tape in the 90s of the entire Iliad, and he read the entire thing, and it was as heroic and just like, adrenaline fueled as you would hope for. So it was great to see him back in action. And Paul Mescal as Lucius, I think he's just fine. Like he's not as badass as Russell Crowe was, but like Russell Crowe in 2000 was a bad motherfucker. I mean, he was just coming off of LA Confidential, where he was just incredible as Bud White. And then he was primed and ready to really make a huge splash with Gladiator. And then he followed it up with like Master and Commander and all these incredible movies. But Paul Mescal, I'd never seen him in anything prior to this. He's good. He's got chops. He might have more, I guess, like sophisticated acting chops than Russell Crowe, but he's just not as heroic. Although he did pack on some muscle for this movie. There's a scene where you see gladiators training and rowing, and it's like, he's got like the traps and the delts and the whole deal. The dude is muscular. Like he's very believable in the action. But in terms of his frame, he's just not as tall and as imposing. There's certain battle scenes where all these gladiators are walking out. And it's like, who invited Danny DeVito into the battle? Like he's a small in stature compared to some of these huge fucking monsters that they recruited for this movie. But yeah, once again, if you want to see bad motherfuckers dressed up in spiked armor with tridents and nets and that sort of thing, beating the crap out of each other, this movie does deliver. And there are a few great battle scenes. They're just not quite as thrilling as that scene, like, when Russell Crowe comes out and he's hacking people to pieces and says, "Are you not entertained?" And those are iconic scenes, which are, 25 years later, still very much large in people's imaginations.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
And even if Ridley Scott is no longer the director that he once was, and even if Gladiator II is not the equal of Gladiator, he and the movie are still better than the great majority of the other movies and other filmmakers that are out there. I'll take Ridley at 86, knocking at the door of 87, over 99% of all the other directors out there, because he knows how to deliver the sizzle when it comes to historical epics. Even as weak as historical epics have great scenes. And just while I'm on the subject, I might as well rip through them. And I guess when you're discussing historical epics, like how far back does it have to be historical? And how big does the story have to be considered an epic? But I consider the following movies to be his list. And I'm going to go from weakest to strongest in my mind right now, having just seen Gladiator II for the first time. But I think his weakest is Exodus, Gods and Kings, followed by Napoleon. Even though I didn't really like Napoleon, the battle scenes were fucking incredible. Then I'd go with Robin Hood. Then 1492, Conquest of Paradise. Not necessarily as like epic, some of these other movies, but goddamn, like some of those sequences when they're sailing across the ocean are some of the most mysterious and beautiful of Ridley's career. And right after 1492, I'm going to rank Gladiator II, then Kingdom of Heaven, the official, there's like 10 different cuts of that fucking movie. I can't remember which is like the official best version. I'm just going to call it the director's cut, but I think there were 3 versions of that movie. Anyway, there's one quote-unquote official version of Kingdom of Heaven. That is the one to check out. Then I'm going to go with The Last Duel, which might be a controversial choice, and maybe some people might argue it's not that much of an epic, but it does have some epic scenes. And then I'm going to go with Gladiator. But I think his best historical epic is The Duelists. And some might cry foul and say The Duelists, it's just basically about two guys having duels over many, many years. But it does deal with the Napoleonic War, so for me it counts as an historical epic. And that was the first feature film he ever made. And yeah, it's incredible that, I still rank The Duelists as one of the best movies that he ever made. I rank it right up there with Alien and Blade Runner and Black Rain and any other movie by Ridley that you care to mention. But my question is, how will the audience receive this? Because I know that it's been setting records internationally for Ridley Scott in terms of being his biggest opening to date internationally. It opened a week elsewhere before the United States. So it's been racking up some nice numbers. And there's Wicked, which is out right now. And a lot of people are hypothesizing or theorizing that Wicked and Gladiator II will work together to both raise each other up and get more people to the theater. And some people might just say, well, fuck it, I'm going to see both movies. While I'm here, I might as well just make a whole day of it because they're both big movies. They're both very long movies. This movie's not, I don't think it's quite as long as the first. I can't remember the running time of the first Gladiator, but this one clocks in, I think, at 2 hours and 30 minutes. I'm seeing here 148 minutes. And I'd seen some people talking trash about the opening credits ahead of time. I kind of like the opening credits. The opening credits, in a very painterly fashion, gives you a little reminder of some of the most iconic scenes from Gladiator, which I really enjoyed. And it was also interesting seeing a lot of familiar faces and familiar names in the credits because, as people who follow this channel probably know, one of my first jobs out of college was working for producer Branko Lustig, who was producing the film Hannibal. And I'm wearing my Hannibal stunt department shirt. I was not in the stunt department, but basically my job was to get Branko to the set and get him home and anything else he thought of during the day. And one of those nights, we were shooting a scene where a bunch of cars had to drive over a bridge, and they needed another driver, so they slapped an FBI jacket on me and an FBI hat, and I got behind the wheel of this Grand Marquis, and we drove across the bridge, and the shots in the movie, so I was thrilled. So yeah, if you stand around on a movie set long enough, people are going to hand you odd tasks and that sort of thing. But like when I saw John Matheson's name in the credits, he was the DP of Hannibal. I was like, hey, I remember that guy. Or Jean-T Yates, who did the costumes. Like Jean-T Yates has been doing costumes for Ridley for decades, and his team is still intact. And so maybe I'm judging this movie a little bit more kindly or favorably because I just have like a sentimental affection for the work of Ridley. But God damn it, he's earned my fucking loyalty. And this was his 29th feature film. Like if you don't include the Apple Macintosh commercial from 1984. The man has made 29 feature films. And name another director who's been directing big budget movies for nearly 50 years. Like Woody Allen's still alive, but I think he basically he wrote his autobiography and he's retired. I don't think Alejandro Jodorowsky is going to make any more movies. Paul Verhoeven's still out there, but he's not working at the same scale that he did back like in the 1980s and 1990s. I still love Paul Verhoeven. He's one of my all-time favorite directors, and he's still alive making great movies, but they're not as big. I mean, once again, I've heard rumors that Gladiator II cost like $400 million to make. Like the official budget that I'm seeing on Wikipedia is that it's being listed as 250 to 310 million. I don't know if that's true or not, but in any case, name another director who's knocking at the door of 90, who's making movies that basically cost as much as like Avengers Infinity War or Avengers Endgame. It's just absolutely insane. So I think in terms of longevity, Ridley has shown more longevity than any other director I can think of because he's had several downfalls and comebacks over the course of his career. Plenty of flops, like famously Blade Runner. People love and adore Blade Runner now. It was more or less a flop when it came out, and he had to kind of have a strategic retreat after that. And he's had a couple periods, like in the 1990s, where he was kind of out in the woods for a while, where after, around the time of like White Squall and G.I. Jane, he'd definitely fallen out of fashion. And then Gladiator was like his big, massive comeback and one of his most successful movies. And I'm just blown away that he still feels compelled to keep working. He just has that attitude where it's like, what else is he going to do? I mean, I guess he could go home and like smoke cigars until he dies, but he clearly loves working with his team and loves building worlds and creating worlds. And he's always talking about how he's got screenplay ideas for Gladiator 3 or for other Alien movies. I'm like, you know what? Bless your heart. Make movies until they close the door in your coffin, because I'll gladly sit through all of them. But for the rest of this video, I'm going to have to go into heavy spoilers. So if you've not seen the movie and you're worried about spoilers, bail out now. Last warning, 3, 2, 1. But I'm secretly kind of hoping and praying that Ridley will find a way to make a Gladiator 3 because I like how there's so much connective tissue in terms of the characters from one to the next. For people who don't know, Paul Mescal's playing a character who is the biological son of Maximus from the first. And what's interesting about his revenge saga versus Pedro Pascal is that Pedro Pascal plays a Roman general who's kind of a reluctant Roman general who's very similar to Maximus, where he just wants to spend time with his family and stop fighting wars. But Paul Mescal, who is on the opposing side of a battlefield, wants his head. And so once Paul Mescal's character is taken prisoner and becomes a slave, here he is in Rome, a city that he hasn't seen since he was a small boy because he was shipped away when he was like 12 or 13 by his mother. So he's on this revenge quest where he wants to kill the guy who's now married to his mother, but at the same time he's reconnecting with his mother in a reluctant way. And also really getting in touch with who his father Maximus truly was, who, if you remember, he met very, very briefly in the first movie, and there's a nice little flashback to that. But what's cool is how the gladiators of Rome, they've got like his quotes on the walls, and they've still got his gear stashed away and that sort of thing. And so a big part of this movie is Paul Mescal, basically claiming his father's heritage, his breastplate, his sword, and so on and so forth, and leading yet another rebellion. And it's a pretty kick-ass rebellion. And what's interesting is how Denzel Washington's character also has some really interesting motivation as well, because at one point he was a slave of Paul Mescal's character's grandfather, Marcus Aurelius, played by Richard Harris. So he's on his own revenge saga where he wants to destroy Rome and or conquer Rome or rule Rome, but he's doing it by playing with their rules and manipulating these crazy fucking emperors who just want to see the world burn on a daily basis. So he knows how to kind of twist them and manipulate them to his advantage. So there's a lot of interesting moving pieces. It never quite fully comes together to the point where it's like this big, grand, stirring, soaring epic. But like I said before, it's better than Exodus. It's better than Napoleon. It's better than Robin Hood. So if you like Ridley Scott's movies, you're totally going to like Gladiator 2. And I know my dad's going to like it as well. I don't know if my dad's ever seen a Gladiator movie that he doesn't like. I mean, it reminds me of that line from Airplane. Like,
you like movies about gladiators?
He was born in 1950, and in the 50s and 60s, there were a lot of gladiator movies being made, or sword and sandal movies, as they're often described. And there are plenty of movies that have sword and sandal ingredients without being sword and sandal movies. For me, to be a true sword and sandal movie, it has to be the main thrust of the story. It can't be part of the backdrop or one scene and that sort of thing, like Spartacus, originally directed by Anthony Mann, but it was taken over by Stanley Kubrick after Mann got fired by producer Kirk Douglas. But that's a sword and sandal movie where you've got the gladiators going through their training, their battles, their rebellion, the war. It's nothing but sword and sandals from start to finish. And that's probably my favorite sword and sandal movie that I've seen. But there are a ton that I haven't seen because there's so many sword and sandal movies from the late 50s and early 60s that were like low budget, like schlocky genre films being cranked out in Italy, where when you're watching them, you're like, is this going to like turn into a porn movie or what's going on here? But it was just a very popular genre, and when the sword and sandal genre started to fade in popularity, a lot of those filmmakers just switched gears and went to work in spaghetti westerns, which is how like Sergio Leone, he made the jump from sword and sandal movies into spaghetti westerns. Anyway, a lot of big Italian directors who were making genre films in the 60s made the switch from sword and sandal into westerns, horror, etc. But I suspect that Ridley Scott, who would have been a young man at the time of like the great heyday of the sword and sandal movies, I suspect he saw a ton of them in the theater back in their heyday. And so yeah, at some point I'm gonna have to do like a top 10 sword and sandal movie. But right now, like or list or video, because I don't even know enough about the sword and sandal genre to do a definitive list, apart from just recommending Spartacus, Gladiator, and this. But for anybody out there who's seen a ton of those movies, please leave some recommendations down below, because I am a sucker for a good movie about gladiators. I mean, in answer to the question from Airplane, yes, I do like movies about gladiators, but I suspect that pilot was asking in a different context.
You like movies about gladiators?
But I think that's all I've got to say. I hope I'm not overselling it or building it up too much. I hope I'm helping people go into it with fair and honest expectations, because, once again, Ridley's made a lot of movies, and only about like 5 to 10 of them are like, woohoo, like insanely good. He's made plenty of trash. I mean, that House of Gucci movie was awful. Apart from Lady Gaga's performance, I mean, House of Gucci is one of the worst movies that he's ever made. Although I think my least favorite movie by him, I can't remember the name of it. It's like The Good Life or A Better Life, or anyway, some wine movie he made with Russell Crowe, which is not a historical epic at all. But I still think that Ridley Scott is one of our greatest living directors. And when his career draws to a close, whether it's due to retirement or due to death or just who knows what the future might hold for him, but in a lot of ways, the historical epic will kind of die with him because there just won't be any people left who know how to do them. I mean, there's some directors who make like HBO shows like Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon where they know how to stage a battle and that sort of thing. But when it comes to filmmakers, people who work exclusively in the world of movies, yeah, I feel like just like there's been so much creative energy directed at superheroes that a lot of directors haven't been sharpening their tools for other genres. But now that the superhero genre is going into a state of decline, I hope that'll leave an opening for historical epics to make a big comeback because people love spectacle. I mean, when I sat down to this movie, there's a giant row of naughty children or teens or, like poorly behaved youths that were all like laughing and screaming and showing each other videos. And like, I mean, they were like going berserk through the trailers. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to watch them and the movie and see how they respond. And about 3 minutes into the movie, they're like, just completely fell under its spell. They didn't say a word or flash a phone again the rest of the movie. It's like, all right, Ridley, you still got it. Like, people like to talk trash about young people, but it's like movies will die if young people don't go, and movies will die if young people don't make them. Embrace youth culture. Invite the youths to go to the movie theater because no art form will last unless you have people in their teens and 20s that are really fired up. So I was thrilled to see that Ridley could still hold a young audience completely spellbound. In any case, I think that's all I've got to say for now. I'll definitely be returning to the subject of Gladiator II on Sunday when I do my box office breakdown, comparing the box office of Wicked to Gladiator II. I've been seeing some reports that Wicked will probably open around $100 million and Gladiator II around $60 million. That's still a big weekend for the overall movie business, and I hope that it'll be like a rising tide lifting all boats where both movies will have some spillover effect and help the others. But yeah, it's a good weekend for the movies, so I recommend people check out both and let me know in the comments below which movie you think to be the superior film. But thank you so much for watching this video. Please let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you like this video, consider liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.